Slide 1. Introduction to SDG 13, Climate Action, a Global and Indian Perspective. Hello and welcome again, this is your host, Harshit Simha, continuing the series from my previous week presentation on SDG 12. Today I am going to discuss climate change stands as one of the most pressing challenges facing humanity today. Its impacts, rising global temperatures, sea level rise, extreme weather events, and biodiversity loss, pose serious threats to ecosystems, economies, and human well-being across the world. In response, the United Nations introduced Sustainable Development Goal 13, SDG 13, which calls for urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. This includes efforts in mitigation, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, adaptation, to adjust to current and future climate effects, and resilience building, to strengthen the capacity of communities and systems to recover from climate-related disruptions. On a global level, countries are increasingly recognizing the importance of coordinated efforts. International agreements like the Paris Agreement aim to limit global warming to below 2 degrees Celsius, with ambitions to stay below 1.5 degrees Celsius. Many nations are adopting policies promoting renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, and green infrastructure to meet their climate targets. However, progress remains uneven, with many countries struggling to meet their nationally determined contributions, NDCs. From an Indian perspective, climate action is both urgent and complex. India is highly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, including intense heat waves, erratic monsoons, droughts, and floods. Despite these challenges, India has taken significant steps by launching the National Action Plan on Climate Change, NAPCC, and actively participating in international climate negotiations. India's focus on expanding solar energy, improving energy efficiency, and promoting climate-resilient agriculture reflects its commitment to sustainable development. However, India also faces challenges such as balancing economic growth with environmental sustainability, addressing energy poverty, and protecting vulnerable populations. Collaborative approaches, both domestically and internationally, are essential to ensure that climate action is inclusive, effective, and sustainable, ultimately securing a livable future for generations to come. Slide 2. Understanding SDG 13, Core Concepts. Sustainable Development Goal 13, SDG 13, focuses on urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. Understanding its core concepts is essential for effectively addressing the climate crisis. The key pillars of SDG 13 include mitigation, adaptation, cooperation, and financing. Mitigation involves reducing greenhouse gas emissions to limit the global temperature rise. The goal is to keep the increase well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, with efforts to restrict it further to 1.5 degrees Celsius. This requires significant reductions in carbon emissions through renewable energy use, improved energy efficiency, and sustainable transport and industry practices. Adaptation focuses on enhancing the capacity of individuals, communities, and nations to respond to climate-related hazards such as floods, droughts, and storms. It aims to build resilience and adaptive capacity to protect both people and ecosystems from the adverse effects of climate change. Measures include climate-resilient infrastructure, early warning systems, and sustainable agricultural practices. Cooperation emphasizes the importance of global collaboration, especially in supporting least developed countries. It involves promoting mechanisms to raise planning and management capacities to deal with climate change, ensuring that vulnerable nations are not left behind in global climate action efforts. Financing is a critical component of SDG 13. Developed countries have committed to mobilizing $100 billion annually by 2020 to support climate action in developing nations. This financial assistance is crucial for enabling poorer countries to invest in mitigation and adaptation strategies, foster innovation, and transition toward sustainable development. Together, these core concepts of SDG 13 underscore the need for an integrated, inclusive, and collaborative approach to climate action. By understanding and implementing these principles, the global community can work towards a more sustainable and resilient future. Slide 3. Understanding significance of climate action. Climate change represents one of the most formidable challenges confronting humanity, with implications that extend far beyond environmental degradation. At its core, the significance of climate action lies in safeguarding life, ecosystems, and sustainable economic development. The pyramid of significance reflects multiple dimensions that underline why urgent action is imperative. At the apex lies the existential threat, underscoring that unchecked climate change endangers humanity itself. Rising global temperatures, extreme weather events, and resource scarcity pose risks that could destabilize societies. Closely tied to this is the principle of intergenerational justice, which emphasizes the moral responsibility of ensuring that future generations inherit a habitable planet. Without decisive measures today, the prospects of tomorrow's world remain bleak. Climate change is also marked by disproportionate impacts, where vulnerable and marginalized populations suffer the harshest consequences. Poor communities, often least responsible for greenhouse gas emissions, face the brunt of floods, droughts, and food insecurity. This amplifies existing inequalities, making climate justice an integral part of climate action. The urgency extends to biodiversity protection, as ecosystems across the globe face mass extinction threats. Healthy ecosystems are indispensable for clean air, fertile soil, water security, and climate regulation, making their preservation critical. Furthermore, climate action is essential for human health preservation. Rising pollution, heat waves, and shifting disease patterns directly endanger public health, increasing the spread of vector-borne diseases and respiratory ailments. Beyond moral imperatives, climate inaction carries steep economic costs. Studies suggest that global GDP could decline by up to 18% by 2050 if warming exceeds 3.2 degrees Celsius, threatening global stability and prosperity. Thus, climate action is not merely an environmental necessity but also a social, economic, and ethical obligation. By embracing mitigation, adaptation, and resilience strategies, humanity can secure a sustainable and equitable future for all. Slide 4. Global climate challenges. The global community faces unprecedented climate challenges that test the resilience of economies, societies, and governance systems. Central to these challenges is the persistence of a carbon-dependent economy. Despite rapid advancements in renewable energy, much of the world remains reliant on fossil fuels, making the transition to sustainable alternatives politically and economically complex. Structural inertia, vested interests, and financial dependencies slow down decarbonization. Another pressing barrier is policy implementation. While international frameworks such as the Paris Agreement set ambitious climate goals, many countries struggle to translate commitments into effective domestic policies. Weak enforcement, fragmented governance, and competing priorities hinder progress, leaving the global trajectory at risk of overshooting the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit. Climate finance poses yet another major hurdle. Developing economies, which are disproportionately vulnerable to climate impacts, often lack sufficient resources for mitigation and adaptation. Although developed nations pledged to mobilize $100 billion US annually, actual disbursement consistently falls short, creating a trust deficit in global cooperation. Without equitable financial flows, sustainable development pathways in the global south remain constrained. Social and political dimensions further compound the crisis. Social resistance, driven by political polarization, misinformation, and fear of economic disruption, delays the adoption of climate-friendly practices. Public acceptance of transitions, such as phasing out coal or adopting climate-smart agriculture, requires sustained awareness, inclusivity, and just transition mechanisms. Overall, the climate challenge is multidimensional. Rising emissions, inadequate adaptation, and governance gaps threaten ecosystems and human societies. Current policies place the world on track for approximately 2.7 degrees Celsius warming by 2100, a scenario that would unleash severe consequences ranging from biodiversity collapse to economic destabilization. To overcome these challenges, an integrated approach, combining decarbonization, policy coherence, equitable financing, and societal engagement, is imperative. Slide 5. Global Climate Governance Framework. The Global Climate Governance Framework has evolved over 3 decades as a response to the intensifying threat of climate change. It began with the 1992 United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, which established the foundation for international cooperation to stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations. Building on this, the 1997 Kyoto Protocol introduced legally binding emission reduction targets for developed nations during the first commitment period, 2008 to 2012, though its scope was limited by the absence of major emitters such as the United States. A transformative shift came with the 2015 Paris Agreement, which adopted a bottom-up approach, requiring all signatory nations to submit nationally determined contributions, NDCs. This agreement set the long-term goal of limiting global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius, with efforts to pursue 1.5 degrees Celsius. Unlike the Kyoto Protocol, it emphasized universal participation, flexibility, and a 5-year cycle of ratcheting ambition. The 2021 Glasgow Climate Pact, emerging from COP26, sought to accelerate climate ambition further. It emphasized phasing down coal, reducing inefficient fossil fuel subsidies, enhancing transparency, and urging developed nations to meet the long-promised $100 billion climate finance goal. This marked the first time fossil fuels were explicitly mentioned in a UNClimate Pact, signaling a significant governance milestone. The evolution of these frameworks reflects a transition from rigid top-down mandates to inclusive, adaptive, and iterative governance. Regular reviews, stocktakes, and enhanced cooperation mechanisms aim to bridge the gap between commitments and action. However, challenges remain: unequal responsibilities, insufficient finance, and varying political will continue to hinder progress. Nevertheless, the governance framework demonstrates growing recognition that addressing climate change requires shared responsibility, long-term vision, and equitable international collaboration. Slide 6. Global Climate Finance Landscape. The global climate finance landscape reflects a significant mismatch between current funding levels and the investment required to meet international climate goals. Between 2019 and 2020, global climate finance flows averaged $632 billion annually, aimed at supporting both mitigation and adaptation efforts. However, this figure accounts for only about 15% of the estimated investment needed to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. To stay on track with the Paris Agreement targets, annual climate investments must rise dramatically. It is estimated that around $4.35 trillion per year is needed globally to transition to a low-carbon economy and build resilience against climate impacts. In 2009, developed countries pledged to mobilize $100 billion annually by 2020 to assist developing nations in addressing climate change. Despite this commitment, the goal was only partially met by 2020 and exceeded for the first time in 2022. This pledge remains a critical benchmark for climate justice, especially for vulnerable countries with limited financial and technical capacity. India, one of the world's most climate vulnerable and populous countries, received around $28.4 billion in climate finance from bilateral and multilateral sources during 2016 to 2019. While notable, this amount is far below the level required to meet its national climate goals and sustainable development priorities. The climate finance gap continues to pose challenges, particularly for developing nations that must balance climate action with economic development and post-pandemic recovery. Mobilizing sufficient capital for climate-related infrastructure, energy transition, and adaptation, while ensuring equitable access and effectiveness, requires stronger international cooperation, enhanced private sector involvement, and reforms in global financial governance. Bridging the climate finance gap is essential to avoid the worst impacts of climate change and to promote a just and sustainable global transition. Slide 7. Comparing climate action globally. Global climate action remains highly uneven, with countries falling into three broad categories: leading nations, middle performers, and lagging nations. These groupings reflect differences in national emissions, energy mix, climate targets, and policy ambition. Leading nations such as Denmark, Costa Rica, and the United Kingdom have taken bold climate actions. Denmark has committed to a 70% emission reduction by 2030. Costa Rica generates 98% of its electricity from renewable sources and aims for net zero emissions by 2050. The UK stands out as the first major economy to legislate a net zero target and has already reduced emissions by 44% from 1990 levels. Middle performers include major economies like China, India, and Brazil. China, the world's largest emitter, is also a leader in renewable energy and aims for carbon neutrality by 2060. India has ambitious renewable energy targets but continues to expand coal use, aiming for carbon neutrality by 2070. Brazil, historically strong in renewable energy, now faces criticism due to deforestation in the Amazon, which undermines its climate credibility. Lagging nations such as Australia, Russia, and Saudi Arabia show limited progress. Australia has high per capita emissions and remains reliant on fossil fuel exports. Russia lacks strong climate policies and remains heavily dependent on oil and gas. Saudi Arabia, with an oil-dependent economy, has historically resisted ambitious global climate agreements. The Climate Change Performance Index, CCPI, evaluates nations on emissions trends, renewable energy use, energy efficiency, and climate policy. However, no country currently performs well enough to earn a top 3 ranking, underscoring the global implementation gap. This disparity in climate action highlights the urgent need for international cooperation, climate finance, and policy reform to align national efforts with the goals of the Paris Agreement. Slide 8. India's Climate Vulnerability Profile. India faces profound climate vulnerabilities that stem from its geography, socio-economic structure, and developmental pressures. With a 7,500 kilometers long coastline, the country is highly exposed to sea level rise, tropical cyclones, and storm surges. The melting of Himalayan glaciers further exacerbates risks by threatening the water security of millions across South Asia, while agricultural regions increasingly confront extreme heat, drought, and erratic monsoons. Such geographic vulnerabilities make India one of the most climate-sensitive nations globally. Socio-economic conditions add to this fragility. A large proportion of India's 1.4 billion population is dependent on agriculture and other climate-sensitive livelihoods. Around 270 million people still live below the poverty line, limiting their adaptive capacity. Moreover, rapid urbanization is generating new vulnerabilities, including the formation of urban heat islands, rising energy demand, and overstressed infrastructure. These factors combine to magnify the impact of climate-related disasters, disproportionately affecting marginalized groups. Developmental pressures create another layer of complexity. India must balance the urgent need for emissions reduction with the developmental aspirations of its vast population. Despite being the world's third largest emitter, India contributes only about 7% of historical global emissions. However, millions of people still lack reliable electricity, and energy access remains central to poverty alleviation and economic growth. Industrialization and urban expansion are crucial for national progress but come at the cost of rising carbon emissions, making sustainable growth a delicate balancing act. India ranks 7th on the Global Climate Risk Index, underscoring its acute vulnerability despite a relatively modest per capita carbon footprint. This profile highlights the necessity of robust climate adaptation strategies, equitable access to clean energy, resilient infrastructure, and international climate finance. Addressing these intertwined challenges will be vital for India to safeguard its population and ensure sustainable development in the face of intensifying climate risks. Slide 9. Climate change impacts in India. India stands at the front line of climate change, experiencing diverse and severe impacts across its geography and economy. Water stress is a pressing concern, with projections indicating that by 2050, per capita water availability may fall below 1,000 cubic meters, officially classifying the nation as water scarce. This challenge is intensified by groundwater depletion, particularly in agriculturally intensive states, undermining both food security and rural livelihoods. Agriculture, the backbone of India's economy and source of livelihood for millions, is profoundly threatened. Rice yields are projected to decline by 10 to 40% by 2100, while wheat production in the Indo-Gangetic plains faces heat stress. Over 100 million farmers are at risk from erratic monsoon patterns, droughts, and floods. Such disruptions could destabilize rural economies, heighten food insecurity, and widen socio-economic inequalities. Heat extremes pose another critical challenge. The frequency and intensity of deadly heat waves are rising, exacerbated by the urban heat island effect in rapidly growing cities. By 2080, heat-related mortality is projected to increase by nearly 90%, placing immense pressure on public health systems and urban infrastructure. Disasters and displacement further illustrate the multidimensional impacts of climate change. Rising sea levels threaten major coastal cities like Mumbai, Chennai, and Kolkata, exposing millions to flooding risks. climate-induced migration is already evident in vulnerable regions, straining resources in urban centers. Economic losses from climate disasters are estimated at 2 to 6% of GDP annually, highlighting the heavy toll on national development. Overall, climate change poses interconnected threats to India's water security, agriculture, health, and urban resilience. Addressing these requires an integrated response, investments in renewable energy, resilient infrastructure, water-efficient practices, and social safety nets, while strengthening international cooperation and climate finance. Only through holistic action can India safeguard its people and development trajectory from escalating climate risks. Slide 10. India's emissions profile. India, the world's third largest emitter of greenhouse gases, presents a complex emissions profile shaped by its rapid economic growth, demographic pressures, and developmental aspirations. Despite its high aggregate emissions, India's per capita emissions remain significantly lower than those of many industrialized nations, just 1.9 tons per person compared to 15.5 tons in the United States and 7.4 tons in China. This disparity underscores the equity dimension in global climate discourse, where India's contribution per individual is modest relative to developed economies. The country's emissions are dominated by the energy sector, particularly power generation, which accounts for the largest share of emissions. Coal remains the backbone of India's electricity mix, contributing nearly 70% of generation. This reliance on coal poses a substantial challenge to decarbonization, as coal not only drives carbon dioxide emissions but also worsens local air pollution and public health outcomes. Industry is another significant emitter, with rapid manufacturing growth and heavy energy consumption adding to the emissions load. Agriculture, too, plays a major role, primarily through methane from livestock and nitrous oxide from fertilizer use, reflecting the rural economy's dependence on climate-sensitive practices. Transport and buildings contribute smaller, though steadily rising, shares of emissions, while waste contributes minimally but remains important for urban sustainability. Looking forward, India's emissions are projected to rise considerably if left unchecked, driven by economic expansion, urbanization, and energy demand from its 1.4 billion population. However, the country has also demonstrated strong commitments to climate action. Ambitious renewable energy targets, including 500 gigawatts of non-fossil fuel capacity by 2030, and forest-based carbon sequestration initiatives are central to India's decarbonization pathway. Balancing developmental imperatives with climate responsibility remains a critical challenge, but India's emissions trajectory will play a decisive role in shaping the success of global climate mitigation efforts. Slide 11. India's climate action initiatives. India has emerged as a key player in global climate governance, demonstrating a strong commitment to sustainable development through a range of climate action initiatives. Central to this effort is the National Action Plan on Climate Change, NAPCC, launched in 2008. The NAPCC encompasses 8 core missions that address both mitigation and adaptation across vital sectors. These include advancing solar energy, promoting energy efficiency, developing sustainable habitats, managing water resources, protecting the Himalayan ecosystem, greening India through afforestation, ensuring sustainable agriculture, and fostering strategic knowledge for informed decision-making. Together, these missions create a holistic framework for balancing growth with environmental stewardship. In alignment with the Paris Agreement, India has also articulated ambitious nationally determined contributions, NDCs. These commitments aim to reduce the emissions intensity of GDP by 45% from 2005 levels by 2030, thereby decoupling economic growth from carbon emissions. Moreover, India seeks to achieve 50% of its cumulative installed electric power capacity from non-fossil fuel sources within the same time frame. Another key pledge is the creation of an additional carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent through enhanced forest and tree cover, underscoring the country's commitment to ecological restoration. A cornerstone of India's climate action is its aggressive renewable energy expansion. With a target of 500 gigawatts of renewable capacity by 2030, India is spearheading one of the fastest clean energy transitions globally. This expansion is bolstered by international initiatives such as the International Solar Alliance, ISA, headquartered in India, which advocates widespread solar energy adoption worldwide. Collectively, these initiatives reflect India's dual pursuit of economic progress and environmental responsibility. By prioritizing clean energy, resource efficiency, and ecological resilience, India positions itself as a global leader in combating climate change while ensuring inclusive and sustainable development. Slide 12. India's climate policy implementation challenges. India's climate policy landscape reflects an ambitious commitment to sustainable development and emissions reduction. However, the implementation of these policies faces significant challenges across financial, institutional, technological, and social dimensions. One of the foremost barriers is financial constraints. The implementation of India's nationally determined contributions, NDCs, is estimated to require over $2.5 trillion by 2030. Mobilizing this scale of investment is particularly difficult given India's limited fiscal space, especially in the aftermath of COVID-19, which strained government resources and diverted spending toward immediate economic recovery. The challenge lies in balancing development needs with climate financing, while also ensuring access to international green finance and technology transfer. A second hurdle is institutional capacity. Many state and local governments lack the technical expertise and administrative strength to design, implement, and monitor climate policies effectively. Weak coordination between federal and subnational levels often slows policy execution, while capacity-building efforts remain inadequate relative to the scale of the challenge. The energy transition adds another layer of complexity. India's reliance on coal for energy security must be reconciled with its climate commitments. Phasing out coal while ensuring affordable, reliable power for a growing population presents a delicate balancing act, especially as renewable integration requires massive infrastructure upgrades and grid modernization. Equally critical is social equity. The transition to a low-carbon economy must account for vulnerable communities that depend on coal and carbon-intensive sectors for livelihoods. Ensuring a just transition, with reskilling, social protection, and equitable opportunities is vital to avoid widening socio-economic disparities. These challenges are compounded by India's federal structure, requiring coordination across multiple levels of governance. Yet, recent initiatives such as the National Green Hydrogen Mission underscore India's determination to overcome these hurdles and align growth with climate responsibility. Slide 13. Climate innovation and technology. Innovation and technology are emerging as the backbone of India's climate strategy, driving both mitigation and adaptation to the pressing challenges of climate change. Advances in renewable energy, energy storage, carbon removal, and climate-smart agriculture are reshaping pathways toward a low-carbon, resilient future. Renewable energy has witnessed transformative growth in India over the past decade. With dramatic cost reductions, solar and wind have become the most affordable electricity sources in many regions. India's solar capacity has expanded nearly 20-fold in 10 years, now exceeding 50 gigawatts, making the country one of the largest renewable energy markets globally. This shift not only reduces dependency on fossil fuels but also strengthens energy security and supports sustainable economic growth. Complementing this is the advancement of energy storage technologies, which are critical for integrating variable renewable power into the grid and enabling large-scale adoption of electric mobility. Lithium-ion battery costs have declined by nearly 89% in a decade, significantly reducing barriers to clean energy storage. In recognition of this potential, India launched the National Mission on Transformative Mobility and Battery Storage, 2019, aimed at accelerating innovation in battery technologies and electric vehicle infrastructure. India is also exploring carbon removal technologies, such as direct air capture, enhanced weathering, and industrial-scale carbon capture and storage, CCS. With initiatives underway in industrial clusters across Gujarat and Maharashtra, these technologies hold promise in achieving negative emissions and offsetting hard-to-abate sectors. Equally vital is climate-smart agriculture, which integrates precision farming, drought-resistant crops, and improved water management practices. Initiatives such as per drop more crop promote micro-irrigation, enhancing water use efficiency and ensuring resilience in agriculture, a sector particularly vulnerable to climate variability. Together, these innovations reflect India's commitment to harnessing technology as a catalyst for sustainable development, balancing growth with climate responsibility, and positioning itself as a leader in climate innovation. Slide 14. Cities in climate action. Urban areas are at the forefront of both the challenge and the solution to climate change. While they generate over 70% of global greenhouse gas emissions, cities also host more than half of the world's population. In India, where the urban population is expected to double by 2050, sustainable urbanization becomes a critical pillar for achieving climate goals. One of the key interventions lies in green buildings, which focus on energy-efficient construction and retrofitting. India has advanced in this area through the DRhs rating system and the Energy Conservation Building Code, encouraging environmentally responsible architecture that reduces energy demand and operational emissions. Equally vital is the expansion of urban forests to improve green cover within cities. Initiatives like the Nagar Van scheme, Urban Forest Program, and the City Biodiversity Index support ecological balance, carbon sequestration, and better air quality. Enhancing urban greenery not only mitigates climate change but also strengthens community resilience against heat waves and pollution. Sustainable transport forms another cornerstone of climate action in cities. With increasing vehicular emissions, promoting public transit and non-motorized options becomes imperative. Success stories like the Delhi Metro, which cuts down 630,000 tons of carbon dioxide annually, and the FAME India scheme supporting electric vehicles, demonstrate scalable solutions for clean mobility. Additionally, waste management plays a crucial role in reducing methane emissions from landfills. Programs like the Swachh Bharat Mission and investments in waste-to-energy projects are transforming urban waste into opportunities for cleaner environments and renewable energy generation. In conclusion, cities represent both the greatest risk and the greatest potential for climate action. Through integrated efforts in buildings, transport, urban forestry, and waste management, India's cities can pioneer pathways for sustainable growth while significantly contributing to global climate mitigation efforts. Slide 15. Future climate projections for India. Climate models indicate that India will face significant warming trends over the coming decades, with projected temperature increases ranging from 2.4 degrees Celsius to 4.4 degrees Celsius by the end of the 21st century under high-emission scenarios. Such warming will not only intensify the frequency and severity of heat extremes but also exacerbate existing vulnerabilities in urban centers. By 2100, heat waves are expected to become 3 to 4 times more frequent, posing severe risks to human health, agriculture, and energy systems. Another critical projection relates to monsoon rainfall. The Indian summer monsoon, which supports agriculture and water supply, is expected to become increasingly erratic. Climate models predict a 40% rise in extreme precipitation events, leading to more frequent floods and associated damages. This variability in rainfall patterns will strain water resources, impact crop yields, and disrupt rural livelihoods, particularly in rain-fed agricultural regions. Sea level rise presents another pressing concern. By 2100, sea levels along India's coastline are expected to rise between 0.5 to 1 meter. Such an increase poses a major threat to densely populated coastal cities such as Mumbai, Chennai, and Kolkata, which are economic hubs. The potential economic losses for these urban centers are estimated at $35-37 billion, underscoring the urgent need for resilient infrastructure and coastal protection measures. In addition, climate-induced migration is likely to become a defining challenge. Without robust adaptation strategies, projections suggest that up to 45 million people in India could be displaced internally by 2050. This would create significant social, economic, and political pressures, particularly in already vulnerable rural and urban areas. Overall, India's climate future is characterized by rising temperatures, erratic rainfall, intensified heat waves, and coastal risks. Proactive adaptation and mitigation strategies are critical to safeguarding lives, livelihoods, and sustainable development pathways. Slide 16. The Path Forward. Recommendations for climate action. Addressing climate change is not only a challenge but also an opportunity to transform societies toward more sustainable, equitable, and resilient pathways. For India, the path forward requires a multi-pronged strategy that balances economic growth with environmental responsibility, while safeguarding vulnerable communities. The first priority is to accelerate clean energy. Phasing down coal while rapidly scaling up renewable energy is critical. This must be supported by investment in advanced storage technologies and robust grid infrastructure to ensure reliability and efficiency. Transitioning to renewables could generate millions of jobs while reducing dependence on fossil fuels and curbing emissions. Second, it is vital to mainstream adaptation. Climate resilience needs to be fully integrated into development planning and infrastructure design. This means considering climate risks in urban planning, agriculture, water management, and disaster preparedness, ensuring that new investments are future-proof against climate impacts. Third, India must build capacity at institutional and community levels. Strengthening knowledge systems, governance frameworks, and implementation capabilities will enable more effective climate action. Local governments, businesses, and civil society should be empowered with resources and expertise to act decisively. Finally, ensuring a just transition is essential. Protecting vulnerable communities, such as farmers, informal workers, and coastal populations, while creating green economic opportunities will ensure that the shift to a low-carbon economy does not exacerbate inequalities. A just transition involves reskilling workers, supporting livelihoods, and ensuring equitable access to clean technologies. In sum, climate action represents an avenue for India to leapfrog to clean development pathways, potentially generating over 15 million jobs while avoiding the pollution and degradation seen in past industrialization models. By fostering global cooperation and local innovation, India can successfully navigate the climate crisis while advancing both human development and environmental sustainability. This brings end to our presentation. As we move forward, we shall begin exploring Sustainable Development Goals 14 Oceans of Change, understanding SDG 14 Life Below Water. We encourage you to stay connected with our channel for the upcoming session, and to share this content with fellow professionals who share their passion for sustainable development with our channel. Until then, I wish you all about their professional journey filled with excitement, challenges and sustainable prosperity.